Hello, and welcome to the Meat Institute's webinar, The Evolution of Foreign Material Inspection from Reactive to Proactive. I'm Casey Gallimore, a Senior Director of Regulatory Policy here at the Meat Institute, and I am going to be your moderator. We're looking forward to a really good discussion today on a topic that we know is top of mind for many of our members. First, a few logistics. We welcome you to use the chat feature if you have commentary at any time throughout the webinar. Your comments can be directed to just the speaker or to any of the attendees and the speakers. Questions, please submit those through the Q&A feature. You can submit those anytime throughout the presentation, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll definitely have some time to go through those questions. This webinar is being recorded. You will be sent instructions on how to access that recording a few days after the webinar in our on-demand email. So thank you, huge thank you to FlexRay for sponsoring this webinar. FlexRay provides expert, accurate, and timely physical foreign material contamination inspection services for the food and beverage industry. From small producers to some of the largest food manufacturers in the United States, producers salvage more than 97% of the product that they have inspected by FlexRay, resulting in billions of dollars of product safely returned to commerce. So we greatly appreciate their support in bringing this extremely valuable topic to our members. So without further ado, I will introduce our speakers for today, Kai Luker and Kurt Westmoreland from FlexRay. I always want to say the extra X in there. Kai serves as the Chief Product Officer at FlexRay, where he leads the development of the company's innovative X-ray inspection process and technology. With over 2 decades of experience in the service, CPG, food, and beverage industries, Kai brings a wealth of knowledge in continuous improvement, quality assurance, and formulations to his role. Kurt is the Chief Commercial Officer for FlexRay and has more than 35 years of experience in food safety. His early career focused on analytical testing with Silica and evolved into a trusted and well-respected sales and commercial operations executive with Myriad Nutrisciences for 28 years. He helped that company expand to a fully integrated food safety provider. Throughout his career, you've probably seen Kurt, as he's been an active member in several industry associations, including IFT, IAFP, AFI, IPPE, FSQA, the Meat Institute, and more. So thank you, Kai and Kurt, for being with us today, and take it away.
Thank you, Casey. So what we'd like to do as we start out here is talk a little bit about some of the market research that we've done over the last couple of years as it relates to foreign material, really in the supply chain and in food. As Casey noted, foreign material is becoming a more and more common topic of discussion when we're talking about food safety and waste reduction, sustainabilities, and really it's kind of, as the slide says here, it's the unspoken challenge that's in the food industry, and how do we deal with that unspoken challenge? We know that we get foreign materials in through the raw materials, obviously through the processing parts of the process, and then through the true manufacturing of the final product. So the opportunity to potentially introduce foreign material is something that really runs the gamut across the manufacturing process. To the right there, you'll see some statistics, and this is based on information that we got specifically from an industry survey that we did, and probably that a lot of you guys participated in. So thank you for that. But in 2024 alone, there were 50 plus recalls that are due to foreign material contamination, and that's just recalls. We also know that the incidence of foreign material and the challenges associated with foreign material is much higher than just the recalls, as illustrated by the 73% there that shows the number of producers that have some type of a foreign material contamination incidence on a quarterly basis. So we know in the marketplace, when you look at what's going on in terms of recalls, you got some of the microbiological challenges that are at the top of the list. Allergens, I think, falls second on the list, and then unless something's changed recently, foreign material falls third on the list in terms of the things that lead to foreign material, in terms of food safety recalls in the industry. So yeah, as I'd mentioned there, there are different ways that foreign materials get into the supply chain, and obviously with raw materials being one of those, you think about livestock and what the livestock eat and how it gets into their diet or gets into the system. And another thing that I was just out at the BIFSCO meeting last week, in a topic or a popular topic of conversation was buckshot and birdshot getting into the cattle as a means of we'll say farming, but as a means of potentially moving the cattle around if they can't get them to move without that. So that's a type of problem that we often see. But the other thing is, when you think about it, you plant organic matter, you can certainly get contamination there when you're harvesting, when you're going through the harvesting process with metal pieces getting there from tractor machinery or even container or plastic containers or pallets and whatnot getting into the product. So, and that's one of the bigger challenges is when we get foreign material coming in from the raw material into the manufacturing or to the processing plant, you're starting out behind the eight ball a little bit right there to begin with because of the materials that you've got coming in. And we'll talk a little bit later about maybe ways to monitor that, to take a look at it, to potentially prevent some of those from coming in. Obviously, the processing of any type of product introduces the opportunity for there to be potential for materials to get into the product as it's going through the processing facility, the process of processing. And if you think about it, one of those could be there. If you look at the third bullet point, if you look at really a maintenance failure of production equipment, when you're looking at preventative maintenance programs, or if something happened as you're going through and doing a cleaning and a screw disappears out of a piece of machinery or a missing thermometer or whatever it may be, there's certainly opportunities through that processing for things to be introduced. One of the examples there may be if you've got a piece of a rubber gasket that chips off during cleaning, or a piece of rubber gasket that chips off during routine maintenance. What are the opportunities to look at those kind of things to prevent it from occurring, and proactively look at those from preventing it from occurring versus reacting to issues that may occur. And then obviously, in the manufacturing process, things happen. We don't like to acknowledge that things happen, and we don't like to talk about the fact that things happen, but they do. And so how do we address it when it does, and what are some of the things that lead to it? And you really take a look at what's potentially going on with with equipment, or what's been introduced into the manufacturing process, i.e. a pin in a product or in a pocket that shouldn't have been there that falls into the process. If you're dealing with glass products, and if you're glass jars, is there a broken jar during the process that drops into the product? We could go through a litany of situations that could occur, but these are the type of things that do occur, and then we have to address them when they do. So when we talk about how foreign material is evolving and what's going on through the process, when you look at the process, on the front end, and we've got this labeled as limited controls, but really what we're talking about is, on the front end of the process, what are the things that are happening and that we're really finding out through a customer or complaints or QA checks, where we're not really looking at it to see what's going on, but we kind of find out late in the process, and you don't have an awful lot of control of what's going on at that front step. But things happen there. And then from there, you move into, the more basic inspections, and how are you taking a look and trying to control foreign materials? And when you think about that, you're thinking about things such as the filter screens and magnet checks, and any kind of physical barriers that you're putting up to try to prevent foreign materials from moving through the process. And again, some of these things are inherent to your standard process. In some cases, they're not inherent to your standard process, but these are some of the more basic things that we see going on in the industry where people are trying to address and handle foreign materials, or the introduction of foreign materials into the process. And then from there, we really get into more automated type detections. And these are things such as inline metal detectors or inline X-ray machines. And obviously the goal of these is to really catch the foreign material before it gets out into commerce. Now, depending on where your metal detector is in line or your X-ray is in line, it doesn't mean you're going to find the foreign material before it gets into your product, unless you've got it at the beginning of the line versus the end of the line. But it does help you protect you as a manufacturer from getting foreign material out into commerce, but not necessarily protecting you from getting it into your product. And a lot of people look at what we do as a third party service, and they're like, well, you're somewhat talking about the value of inline X-ray, and we do feel like there's a value to inline X-ray because metal detectors are looking for metal, and inline X-rays can help you find things outside of metal, and we think it's certainly a step that, as a manufacturer, it's worth evaluating in terms of the ROI to your operation as to whether or not it's something that makes sense. Because it's at the end of the day, we're all here to protect public health. We're all here to keep product in commerce and reduce food waste. And one of the ways that you might be able to do that in your operation is the implementation of inline detection type systems. Well, what happens? What happens, or what are the next steps if you do identify something and there's something going on? What are the verification activities that you may be taking place with, or that you may be utilizing, to really verify that your systems and your processes are working? And that's really where we come in as a third party provider of X-ray inspection services. Is you're doing the work up front to identify and find if you've got a problem. You certainly want to identify and find out if there's a problem before the product gets into commerce. But once you find the problem, once you identify how big the problem is, then a decision has to be made as to what you're going to do to address the problem. In many cases, your first option is you're going to look at, okay, what would it take for me to do this internally, for me to rework the product internally, and verify through internal work that we've segregated what we need to segregate out in terms of impacted product, and we're releasing the product that's not impacted. But there are a lot of pieces that go into that internal rework, and I won't get into the details of them now, but there's a lot of work that goes into that in terms of shutting down lines, making sure you've got labor, impacting your supply chain. And so, an alternative to that from a verification standpoint is to take a look at someone like FlexRay, where we're doing third party evaluation and inspection and measurement of what's in the product, and helping you segregate out the bad stuff and helping you keep the good stuff in commerce. I know that sounds very simple, but that's really what we're here for, is to keep bad product out of commerce and help you keep good product in commerce. And with the focus now on waste reduction, sustainability goals, it's just so key to keep as much product in commerce as possible. One of the things that we do know is, on average, about 98% of what we inspect stays in commerce. So the ROI for a manufacturer to go through this process and to keep 98% of the potentially impacted product in commerce is really significant. And then one of the other things that you'll want to think about, and we'll talk a bit more to this a little bit later on, is how do you get proactive? What can we do proactively to take a look at the potential foreign material and product versus being reactive and having to go through automated detection and verification activities? And one of the things that we can look at is, how do we do supplier monitoring? What does supplier monitoring really mean? How do you design supplier monitoring programs? Because as we talked a little bit on the previous slide, things are coming in ingredients. And if you've got a situation, or you've got a supplier that you've worked with in the past that you has had some foreign material challenges, do we put that kind of a supplier on a routine program where they're submitting X number of truckloads per production run, or X number of truckloads per month, as a monitoring system to make sure that they've got their controls under control, prior to you getting ingredients in from those guys. And you can do the same type thing with co-packers as you're doing your due diligence for co-packers. And we'll talk a little bit, again, more about this later on. The other thing that you can potentially take a look at doing, more proactively is, when you're going through your preventive maintenance programs and you're making change out some components that are in your manufacturing environment, are those components that are being used in your equipment, are they actually something that can be identified via X-ray, whether it's inline or third party with us? Because there are types of plastics, hard plastics, But there are types of plastics that you're not going to find on an X-ray. There are types of rubber gaskets that you're not going to find on an X-ray. But there are also types of plastics that can be used as a replacement for some of the others. And there are also types of rubber gaskets that can be found via X-ray, either in line or externally. So as you proactively evaluate your preventive maintenance program, are there opportunities to exchange components and utilize components that might be X-ray identifiable should a problem occur?
Okay, metal detection and X-ray are obviously the most common ones that are being used. But I want to take an opportunity to talk about a few other types of systems. We're probably at the height of technologies that are at offer for inline inspection. Vision systems and hyperspectral vision systems, there's an opportunity there to find plastics or wood or things that traditionally are impossible to find via an X-ray system whenever product is being conveyed on an open conveyor belt. So typically a vision or hyperspectral system might have been used for a qualitative analysis of color or of defects, but it can also be used to find foreign material as well. And there are spectacular vendors of that technology in the marketplace. Microwave technology is probably the best tool that we have to fight foreign material. It's also one of the more limited ones as well, but it has the opportunity to find very thin pieces of foil, glove, bag liners, things like that, that traditionally would be impossible to find in any other method. The product just needs to be somewhat homogeneous in nature and able to go through a pumping system. And then finally, CT technology is emerging. It's based on the X-ray platform, but we're using a gantry in order to recreate or rebuild an X-ray image. And we're able to find things like wire that are difficult due to positional issues or rubber gasket that are difficult because of the interaction of layers of product when doing an inline X-ray inspection. And then finally, since X-ray is the most common and the one that's increasing at the highest rate of use, what can we see whenever we use an X-ray? So just a quick primer on that. So everything in the middle of the periodic table, all of those metals, and then over to the left, things that are found in bone like calcium and magnesium and sodium, potassium, all of those make for detectable items, things that are easy to find in a food matrix under X-ray. Towards the right, we get into more difficult things here. And so these are the things, the organic substrates that are part of food themselves. So part of the protein and fat of any protein. These things are much more difficult to find from an X-ray standpoint because they don't offer enough separation and density. The difficulty with a lot of plastics is they fall under the same chemical makeup as the food product itself does over here, or even less dense in nature. So we need to add chemical markers to those to improve detection of plastics. So things like Teflon and Rulon, they're just that. They're a plastic molecule that's had a chemical added to those. It makes it easier to detect. It also makes it easier to perform in a food manufacturing environment as well. And then just to compare inline detection, to the right, we're comparing it directly with FlexRay's technology. But essentially, I want to treat this like an inline inspection versus a re-inspection. From a run speed perspective, the limitation of detection on an inline system is mostly based on the speed of manufacturing. It's not necessarily that the detectors are inferior in an inline piece of equipment versus those at FlexRay. We're slowing down substantially so that we can improve the inspection capabilities. So if we're doing re-inspection in a food plant with the same machine at the same speed and at the same detection limit, we're really not offering an improved detection or improved inspection whenever we're doing rework or re-inspection. We need to slow down as much as possible in order to improve those detection limits, pass more photons through the product, create better imaging quality, and improve those detection limits. So as an example, the devices that we're using at FlexRay, we can detect easily down to 0.5 millimeters for metal and down at 1.5 millimeters and below for more detectable plastics, bone, soda lime glass, things like that, purely due to the speed that we slow the process down to. And then finally, with the FlexRay instrument, we are able to manipulate the MA and the KV of an instrument, whereas your inline is set up to run that product combination at a fixed kV and MA at all time. I'm going to pass this back over to Kurt at this time.
So, what does a typical reactive form material process look like? And I had alluded to this a bit earlier in some of the other conversation, but when you're talking about a reactive type approach, you're in the top line there. We're taking a look at the X-ray flags metal in a product batch, or you could even say your metal detector you might flag metal in a production batch. Based on that, then your quality assurance group would take appropriate reaction. You react to the fact that you found something within the process. Food safety and quality team would then initiate a root cause investigation to find out where it came from, what was the cause of the problem. As part of that, you go through the process of utilizing the resources and the labor pulled out of production to do potential reinspection or to identify and see where the issue was and where the challenge came from. And then obviously, based upon the extent of the problem, you got to add production runs, back into the schedule to catch up with the supply chain to make sure that you're not shorting customers, because that's the last thing you want to do is damage a customer relationship due to the fact that you've had to pull product out of commerce. So when you think about it, what are some of the real effects of these reactive type approaches? Your resources, and we all know in today's society and today's workforce, and resources are limited. Your resources, really do get used inefficiently because your resources are now being used to go through and potentially re-inspect product versus the core competency of what you're doing, and that is making whatever particular product that you guys are trying to get into commerce. You obviously cost of labor being what it is today, downtime of your machines, associated overtime. What we see in some cases, or a lot of cases with our customers that try to rework internally, not only do they have these costs associated, but many times they'll come in on a weekend and maybe do the rework or rerun a line on the weekend because that's the only time they can free up the equipment and free up production. Really there is some uncertainty there as to how much product is affected, because when you go through the rework process, let's say you're using an inline X-ray machine and you rework with an inline X-ray machine, well, what you're really doing is you're reworking with the same technology or the same system that you did the initial screen for. And so what you're basically doing is re-looking at the product exactly like you did before. Whereas if you go outside to a third party, now you got a different technology with a stronger KV and MA. You can run product differently with different types of orientations through the machine. Machines run much slower, and so you have the potential to maybe find some things that you're not going to find via inline rework, because it truly is a different type inspection versus just a rework from what is going through the process to begin with. And so that that's that fourth line there where we're talking about you going through the same type process. The inline technology does have some limitations. And again, we advocate for inline technology, so don't take this as that we're saying inline technology is a bad thing. But what inline technology typically does is you have to calibrate that technology to the form material that you're looking for, or you're having to calibrate it to a specific size of form material that you're looking for. And as part of that, you run into the challenge that you can actually calibrate the machine such that you're only going to find one type of form material at one particular size or a particular size and up, which opens the door for potentially missing other form materials that might be present in a particular product type. So it's one of those things is if you do inline work, you need to speak with your inline provider to make sure you're going through that calibration process with them and they're helping you to understand that. Obviously, you've got the potential lost revenue from from not having safe product out there. And if you're not able to segregate it well enough, or if you're going through and doing the same type of reinspection again, it could be that your release rate or your waste rate is much higher than what it might be if you did work outside, because you got some of the same triggers that may be throwing off false positives and those kind of things throughout the process. And then obviously, once you're through with that, what is the product disposition and the decisions that you got to make on those? It's obviously the more product that is withheld, or the more product that you have to pull back, then you're either going to have to downgrade it or landfill it or make a decision with it. And obviously there are costs associated as you go through that process from being reactive through the process. So one of the things that, we've, and I alluded to this a bit earlier, is, how do we look at these and how are things evolving? And I'm not going to repeat, a lot of the things that I said before, but this verification step of the foreign material program, the verification step of the process, is something I think everyone needs to think about and needs to consider, because really what we're looking at is an advanced secondary detection. And that's what I had alluded to, a couple of minutes ago when I was saying it's different than what we do when we're running or repeating an internal rework type process. And it's key for us to go through that and look at it from that situation. And part of that, may involve, looking at a third party or utilizing a third party, such as FlexRate, to make sure that you're getting to the next level of the inspection, or you're getting to the next level of the verification and verifying what's going on within your process. I think the other key to this, when you're looking at it from a verification standpoint, is, and especially with this meeting that we're on today, is these verification activities and these steps in the verification process really do align with some of the things that have been outlined within the Mead Institute's maturity model that probably many of you guys worked on here. And it's something that the Mead Institute has for you guys or for their members as a resource as to how to look at foreign material programs. And this verification activity is a key piece of that. So, we had talked about this a bit earlier. Again, these things start to tie together. We talked about, really what we're looking at in terms of, the reactive response. But what does the reactive response look like if you've got external inspection going through the process? And so I'm not going to repeat all of the things that I just talked about there in the first two columns in terms of the reactions to the foreign material challenges are there. We've already been through that. You guys, you heard the detail around each of those. But, let's talk about what happens when you move forward, with a third-party external inspection after you've gone through and you've had to react to a situation. At the end of the day, what and I think I mentioned this on the very first slide that I spoke to, we're all here to help reduce product waste. We want to keep as much product in commerce as we can, and that's the goal. But we want to keep as much safe product in commerce as we can, and we don't want there to be challenges associated with that. We want to reduce the product downgrades, because obviously if you're downgrading product, you're downgrading margins, and you don't want to get into that situation. We want to make sure that in terms of what you guys are or what we're providing, or what you should look at for any third party provider, is that they're really providing you with a supporting data that you need to make a decision, whether it's for hold and release or whether it's for ongoing long-term monitoring. And what does that data look like? What's involved in that data? Not only is it the inspection reports that you may get, but it may also be inspection reports plus returning to you the foreign material that might have been found in the product and might have been removed as part of contaminant retrieval program. Or it could even go so far as to take product removed through the contaminant retrieval program and having a third-party provider work with another, like a third-party laboratory that can do metallurgy work, that can do identification of the foreign material and dig into it and help you identify really the true source of what the foreign material may have been, versus just the fact that, we think it was a scraper blade. Well, we don't know it was a scraper blade, you can have the analysis done, the chemical analysis done to determine particularly where it might have come from. From your standpoint, as a manufacturer of food products, and as you start to you reduce the amount of product that you have to pull out of commerce, the thought would be that your customer satisfaction is going to increase because you're going to keep product in the supply chain. You're not going to be shorting orders, and you're going to making sure that your customers get the product they need. But not only do they get the product they need, but they get the product they need without foreign material present and without potentially creating problems as it gets further into the supply chain. You also you have a much less need for doing overruns and reruns of product because, again, when this work comes through, if you're let's say you got 100,000 pounds, you get 100,000 pounds of product you send out for reinspection, and you're able to keep 98,000 pounds in commerce, utilizing the average of 98% of what comes through is it actually stays in commerce. That's a significant amount of product. And a lot of the projects that we see are significantly higher than 100,000 pounds. So when you start doing the math, the amount of product that stays in commerce as a result of going through these processes is pretty substantial. And then obviously, the sustainability goals and the outcomes. I don't want to really get into the details of sustainability because, number one, I don't know it well enough. But number two, you guys have all got varying types of varying types of programs and varying levels of expectations around sustainability and what it means. And so it's something, though, that as you think about this and you think about potential foreign material challenges in your product, that you probably do want to work through and talk with your sustainability leads to see how some of the efforts that you may make in terms of evaluating and looking into your foreign material programs might address and enhance the overall sustainability goals of your company. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. The foreign material, it's going to be there. Whether we want it to be there or not, it's going to be there. But really, how you respond to it as a manufacturer and how you respond to it in the industry is really going to address how you move forward as a company in terms of the evolution of your programs. And one of the things that we'd like to talk a little bit about here, I'd like to talk a little bit about is what does that look like in terms of proactive inspections? I know, one of the questions that came in prior to the webinar from the attendees was really about the supplier monitoring. What does supplier monitoring look like? How do you set up supplier monitoring programs? How frequently do you monitor and take a look at suppliers if you were to take a look at this? And I don't think there's not one right answer that's going to address every single one of you guys as a manufacturer. And so I think it really, you have to take a step back and take a look at your overall program, your relationship with your suppliers, and your history with your suppliers. But, the one thing about working in this space and one thing about taking a look at supplier programs is, many of your suppliers have already been used to working through food safety type programs and food safety requirements and specifications associated with some of those things. And so there's a lot to consider when you look at this. And so I think the next slide actually has a lot of that detail, and we'll speak to that there on the next slide if we can move forward. So what do we look like? So when we get to a really true proactive foreign material management program, what does it look like? We're looking at these supplier programs exactly like I was talking about. And as part of the supplier programs, what we're really looking at is, what types of surveillance or quality audits are we doing with our suppliers? As I alluded to earlier, these guys are used to programs as part of their specifications for doing work with you. And some of you guys on the call here may be suppliers, and so you're used to these in terms of supplying to other end users of your product. And most of the time, those supplier programs involve routine audits, GFSI type audits, but it's not uncommon for those supplier requirements or specifications to include things like microbiological monitoring, chemical monitoring, and one of the things that you might want to consider, or one of the things that I think you could look at from a proactive standpoint, is how do we incorporate foreign material monitoring into these same type programs, into these same type product specifications. Obviously, you're not going to require a supplier to send every single lot of product that they manufacture, or a representative sample from every lot through a third party facility to be inspected, because it's just not realistic for that to happen on a large scale. If it's a small manufacturer with small lot runs, it could be potentially something that could be done. But how do you look at it and say, okay, from the relationship we've got with this supplier, we've got a high volume, high risk supplier that we've also had a high level of foreign material contamination. Well, that's one that you're probably going to say, hey, we'd like for you to send in X number of pallets or X number of trucks on a biweekly or monthly basis, so that we can establish some baseline and we can establish that you're doing the right things and we're not having ongoing problems. Could be you got a high risk, high volume supplier that you've had very, very few problems with, and maybe you say to those guys, hey, you've done a good job for us and we're not having issues. And as part of that, maybe you're taking a look at those guys on a quarterly basis. You got X number of pallets per quarter that you're looking at. And those are the kind of things I think that, when you're looking at it internally, you really have to look at it more on a per supplier and a per product basis, and make the right risk-based decisions internally. Again, there's not a right or wrong answer for it, but it needs to be risk-based, based upon your product, based on what you're manufacturing, what we're allowing to get into commerce. Obviously, some of these same things apply when you're looking at new product launches, or if you're working with a co-packer that's going to be running new products for you. Again, as part of that due diligence, you kind of go through the same thought process of the surveillance and quality audits as you go through that startup, and to make sure that there's nothing being introduced early on, and then maybe for a period of time, after that product hits the marketplace, you're doing some ongoing routine monitoring, and then maybe it tapers off after that. Again, you have the ability as a food safety leader within your organization to design these programs the way you want them designed, but also design them from a risk management standpoint to best meet the needs of you as the final manufacturer of the product. And we've already talked a little bit earlier about the detectability checks within equipment when we're looking at it from a preventive maintenance type program. So I won't speak to that in any great detail. So Casey, I think now we're getting to the Q&A part of the conversation here. So I'll let you take it over from here.
We are. Thank you, Kurt and Kai. We do have some questions that were both submitted in advance, and then one so far that has been submitted. So please, attendees, at any point, jump in and submit questions through the Q&A. Kurt, you kind of just touched on this a little bit, but I know I think kind of readdressing it might be good for some folks. So let's say you've got a supplier who you've had some difficulties with. You've had foreign material incidents that have been associated with that supplier. Maybe it's different kinds of things, and you're kind of having this issue where the supplier continues to not be able to identify the root cause. Claims unsubstantiated. It's not coming from your process, but your supplier is maybe not in a position where they're willing to admit that it's coming from their process. What do you do with that situation?
Yeah, and that's not as much of a supplier monitoring program as it is identifying a challenge and a potential problem with a supplier and digging deep into that. One of the things that we've seen occur in the marketplace, and it's something that we help manage pretty often, is if there is a known supplier with a history of known challenges, it's one of those things that you work directly with that supplier and have open conversation about it. And while the supplier may not indicate or may not feel like the problem has been their problem, one of the ways that you can address that is to is to say, okay, look, we would like for you to send 1, 2, 3 truckloads of product, whatever it may be, based upon how big the supplier is to you, how much work you do with them. And you ask that supplier to send in product really as a verification step of what they feel like, and a verification step of what they're telling you as a supplier. And I think it's important when you have that conversation with the supplier is that you really you look at it from a standpoint of, we're in this together. We want to do work with you. We want you to be a supplier. But if we're going to work with you, then we got to know that what we're getting from you is good product. You may look at it, as the end user, depending on where you're at in the supply chain. You may look at it as a requalification process for a supplier that you've qualified in the past, but that you've got some challenges bubbling up. Kai, I know you've had a little bit of history with this in the past, with the company, so maybe you want to speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, in particular, there's a couple of larger QSRs in the country that have multiple suppliers, sometimes even double-digit number of suppliers. And we've seen issues where they've had to write into their service level agreements for suppliers that if foreign material incidents exceed X, or complaints from a restaurant standpoint exceed X, then we are viewed as a requalification step for that supplier to have their product reaccepted by those QSRs.
That is interesting. Kai, this might be a good one for you. How do you combat that mindset from operations? It's not just operations. There's others, I think, that misunderstand inline detection systems. But how do you help combat that mindset that, well, we have an inline detection system, it's fine, we'll catch everything? How do you help re-educate that inline detection systems aren't necessarily magically all powerful?
Yeah, having spent my previous life in operations, I understand the problems that I helped cause in my previous life that I helped solve today. But I think the number one thing is understanding that detection device is a signaling device. It's not a measuring device. A check weigher inside of a system, that's a measuring device, and we're getting constant feedback about every single thing that goes across it. Unfortunately, the metal detector or the X-ray is just a signal that we've achieved something above a threshold that allowed us to trigger that. But there's still underlying issues or smaller pieces of foreign material that are bubbling below the surface that we're not seeing that noise because it's not meant to be measured constantly.
One of the ones that was submitted in advance is, what kind of training and safety protocols are you all used to seeing that establishments will have in place for their employees to focus on foreign material?
Casey, if you don't mind clarifying a little bit from a safety and training extent, do you mean how you approach it in your written programs?
Yeah, how are you all seeing establishments approach foreign material in their program?
Oddly enough, we've been approaching Ask FSIS with some questions for clarification, around this over the last few weeks. And every time that we propose a new question, it really comes back to, are you documenting your steps in your written program, in your written procedures, in your flow chart the right way, even to the point of using an offline X-ray for secondary inspection or a third-party X-ray? When you have that incident, are you stopping and doing the due diligence upstream to understand where it is? And then in the case of using something that can get down to a lower detectable limit than your inline X-ray could at full speed, or your inline metal detector, if we re-inspect that and are able to better, so to speak, filter the good from the bad product that's in that potential hold, where do the next steps lie? And at the moment, so long as everything is written in your procedure, what we're getting back from Ask FSIS is that that's the due diligence, so long as it's in the documentation and we retain all those records.
Have you all noticed any trends in the types of material that you'll see? So are there certain materials you see way more often in beef products versus poultry products versus snack foods versus raw meat and poultry? Any interesting trends you all are seeing through your inspection activities?
I think bone as a foreign material in the poultry world is obviously unique just because of the way that it has a tendency to develop and break and fracture in a unique way that provides, its own, source of risk. But uniquely, we see a lot of folks that are really doing better due diligence with their gasket and O-ring programs, stepping up and away from UHMW and HDPE into better detectable plastics overall. And I just think that's net positive for everybody in the industry to continue to drive towards using things in the plant that are more detectable.
So this was a question that was submitted in advance, and it's really for me. But I welcome your all's thoughts on if there's something that we should be doing. But someone kind of posed in advance of the webinar, what can the Meat Institute be doing more to help reduce foreign material? As you all know, over at FlexRay, we produced a foreign material manual back in 2021, and we redesigned our design principles for equipment to incorporate, foreign material aspects. What else do you guys think that we could do, industry could do? What's necessary? What's some next steps?
I think we touched on it briefly around some different technologies. And I know that it was a definite blind spot in my previous life. As manufacturers, we're excellent at making and executing the thing that we are selling. But we're not always good subject matter experts of the technology that are available or that we use in our own plants. And I think that, offering some expanded education around the types of technology, what they do, what are their use cases, the pros and cons, I think that could probably be useful, Casey.
And Casey, I think one of the things that I know you guys are already doing, through the development of the maturity model and some of the conversations that we've had is, there is still some ambiguity out there, especially from the FSIS perspective as to what does foreign material really mean. There's not a number associated with it. There's not a defined, hey, if you're below this number, then you're okay to release product. Kai alluded to some of the questions from Ask FSIS, and and when you take a look at the directive and you really dig into it, it refers to the standpoint of if you're doing the right things, you've got it built into your programs, you're doing the segregation the way you should, you're doing the evaluations the way you should, and you've gone through all the steps the way your program is designed to do, you're doing the right things, and you're in essence, you're not necessarily being set up for any type of regulatory action. And I think, as the Meat Institute, that's something you can continue to work with the suppliers or to the manufacturers and with us and the agency, just to make sure that, where possible, ambiguity is removed. I'm not saying it is possible. I'm saying if it is possible to potentially remove ambiguity, I think that would be a net benefit for everybody.
Absolutely. We've certainly been trying over the years, and I think it will always be a continued effort to get as much clarity as possible on that. So, the title of this webinar is From Reactive to Proactive, and you highlighted some ways that we can maybe be a little bit more proactive. Any other thoughts on kind of switching that mindset to responding when there is an incident and trying to put things in place to keep foreign material out?
Yeah. I noted one of the questions, and I think it's probably the one you're referring to, is, really how does our technology move to a more proactive approach? And it's not necessarily our technology, but it's working with industry to establish processes and systems that are more proactive, i.e., the co-packer due diligence, where you're digging in early on in the process as part of a first production run or first few production runs to make sure that there's no challenges being introduced into the process. Taking a look at suppliers on the front end or monitoring suppliers on a routine basis to make sure that ingredients that you have coming into your process don't have foreign materials in there. So you're being proactive in terms that you're looking upstream to make sure you're identifying problems before they get into your manufacturing environment and before they get into commerce, versus waiting until after they get into the processing or manufacturing environment. You find in those post-processing.
Yeah, it's definitely a tricky situation, and trying to find the right place in the process to put controls in place. Let's talk about size of foreign material, because it's complicated and it's difficult. So, as you kind of alluded to, Kurt, there's not really a magic number that FSIS will accept. They have a very zero tolerance approach when it comes to foreign material. So how do you all kind of work with your customers in dealing with what target size you're going after for inspection?
So our approach overall to target size is really a measure of our detection capabilities given any given foreign material and products interaction. I'm going to try to tackle the question a little specifically the way that's written there, Casey, in the chat. I like that they're being very specific here. So if my detection limit is 0.5, why is 0.4 millimeters okay, and how do I support that? And I think that the answer is I'm not trying to say that 0.4 millimeters is okay to be found from a foreign material standpoint if my detection limit is 0.5. I think that the way that we need to approach how we write our HACCP programs and food defense programs are, if my inline detection standard is, I'm going to use a millimeter as an example for ferrous, that we are using the most robust detection capable for our production line, a production environment, and anything that's below the millimeter of ferrous that we're capable of detecting is below any reasonable food safety risk at that point in time. And we're testing and verifying throughout the day or the shift that our system works as it's intended and functions at 1 millimeter. And at the end of the day, that's the burden that the agency is asking us to uphold, and that's it.
Interesting question. Your focus in this webinar's focus is obviously on foreign materials. Can you all find things other than foreign materials? Any other magical things that you guys can look at through your processes?
On the pathogen side, not yet. But there are some amazing work being done in vision systems.
Yeah, definitely with some of the vision systems. I'm curious though, with what your systems are running, are you able to find any quality defects, or can you see things like abscesses, or is there anything else you guys kind of, maybe you weren't looking for it, but you accidentally kind of found something? Or
we've had some very interesting projects along those lines, and frankly, eye openers for me, being in the industry. So I'll let Kai speak to them because he gets into the weeds with them. He's lived them a little bit more deeply. But there's been some interesting ones. So Kai, I want you to speak a little bit of that.
Yeah, from using our detection equipment to find things other than foreign material, fill levels, cracks in glass jars, seams, seal issues, things like that. Missing the temperature indicator popper on certain roasts and things like that. We've been able to identify. So we can use our system in a way to do other qualitative checks or quantitative checks as well than just foreign material. So long as X-ray is just the right method in order to be able to, quote unquote, see those.
Nice. Someone kind of jumped in on there. Are you able to see elevated moisture content? Is that something that an X-ray would be capable of?
So our X-rays in particular are more medically geared from an imaging perspective. Yes, there are X-ray devices that can be used in an analytical fashion for fat and moisture testing. Ours in particularly are not.
Good to know, but it's interesting those kind of quality aspects that you are able to look at through your system. So thank you for that. We only have a couple more minutes left, so I definitely want to make sure we give both of you a time. Is there something you wish someone would have asked? Is there a takeaway message you'd like to leave folks with? Kurt, why don't you go first?
No, the one thing that I was thinking as we were going through this is this audience has actually submitted a lot of good questions, and these are the type of questions that we often try to answer for the marketplace. And I think we've covered the majority of it. The one thing that we continue to reiterate to our customers and to the marketplace is, we're all in this thing together. It's all about keeping safe food in commerce and reducing food waste, and that's what our job is here is to help you do that. And I think the big thing is, and there was a question here, is like, how do you manage the relationship between quality assurance and operations when operations is looking at it from a cost perspective? But at the end of the day, I think it's really an opportunity for, and again, I don't know who the audience on the call is today, but maybe half operations and half quality. But I think having upfront proactive conversations around foreign materials and product and what it means to the overall organization in terms of organizational goals around waste reduction, sustainability goals, and really the ROI on these type projects is huge. And I think you can use these kind of conversations and this kind of information, and even a replay of this webinar, to have those internal communications to ensure that alignment within your own company as you look at foreign material and help break down some of the barriers that may be there.
Thank you, Kurt. Any last thoughts, Kai?
We mentioned CT technology briefly earlier, and I would be remiss. We've said no to a lot of projects at FlexRay over the years. We're not here to increase or add any risk to anybody's food safety situation. And we've said no to a lot of projects because we couldn't see those with traditional 2D X-ray. And so if you've had that from us in the past, from a feedback perspective, now's a good time for us to revisit some of those things that we traditionally could not see. With CT scanning, it's really opened up a big window with gaskets and O-rings, those types of materials, scrapers, utensils, etc.
Yeah, it's going to be really fascinating to see that technology continue to develop and its utilization in this space. So thank you both, Kurt and Kai and FlexRay, again for your sponsorship of this webinar. We've got a bunch more educational content coming up, so please always make sure to check out our events page for what's coming up soon. You can either go to our website and navigate to events, or use this QR code to get there directly. And thank you again for your participation. Like I said, a bunch of great questions submitted, and I hope to see you all at future events. Have a great day.
Thank you all.